Hello and welcome to the Black Ponder. I'm Neil Trotter. Today we're going to be talking about some philosophy of science. That's right, we're going to be doing that by discussing this classic text, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. Thomas Kuhn started off as a scientist, and then he focused more on the history of science. And as he studied the history of science, he began to contemplate and write about the philosophy behind science. That is a thing, that is a branch. And he is one of the most famous things about Thomas Kuhn is his dubbing or inserting into the world the popularity of the term paradigm shift. Have you heard that term before? Paradigm shift? You probably have, because it's so popular in pop culture. But when the term's being used today, oftentimes it has very little to do with what the original concept of the word meant. Kind of like natural selection, right? You type in the word natural selection into YouTube, and you're probably going to find a lot of videos that have very little to do with what the original concept of Charles Darwin meant when he first dubbed the term natural selection. Same thing with paradigm shift. I can recall paradigm shift in recent memory from this video game I really like called Final Fantasy 13. Final Fantasy, very famous Japanese role-playing game franchise. The 13th installment had a game mechanic called paradigm shift. That's something that you do in the game. That's how you control the artificial intelligence of the playable characters, because the playable characters have all these different behaviors, like they can heal, they can fight aggressively, they can be more support to your team, and you can change the behaviors of the playable characters dynamically by doing these things in the game called paradigm shifts. But that, again, that has little to do with what the original concept is. It's just so permeated into popular culture, just the word paradigm shift just sounds cool, or the term paradigm shift. But we're going to be talking about the original term. Alright, so what Thomas Kuhn is doing in this text is he's trying to explain or come out with some sort of process as to how the enterprise of science works. How does science develop over time? This is what Thomas Kuhn is trying to discuss. How does science work as a discipline, as a practice, okay, as an enterprise? How does it mature over time? How does it develop? And what does that mean, really? What is the philosophy behind science? This is what we're going to be discussing today. And as you know, with the Black Ponder, I like to allow the books to speak for themselves. So we're going to read a lot of quotes and we're going to just talk about it. And by reading the quotes, we're going to try and discuss what actually is Thomas Kuhn saying. The first quote I have, here we go. Aristotle's Physica, Ptolemy's Almagest, Newton's Principia and Optics, Franklin's Electricity, Lavoisier's Chemistry, and Lyell's Geology. These and many other works serve for a time implicitly to define the legitimate problems and methods of a research field for succeeding generations of practitioners. They were able to do so because they share two essential characteristics. Okay, two essential characteristics. Number one, their achievement was sufficiently unprecedented to attract an enduring group of adherents away from competing modes of scientific activity. Number two, and simultaneously, it was sufficiently open-ended to leave all sorts of problems for the redefined group of practitioners to resolve. Achievements that share these two characteristics, I, Kuhn, shall henceforth refer to as paradigms. So that's the definition of paradigm according to Kuhn. You know, he's using this word that wasn't used really that much before he dubbed it. The definition is that it attracted a large group of adherents or scientists that were doing something else, and they hopped on board. They said, oh, I want to study that. And the other one is so open-ended that there's work to be done. There's so much work to be done for those adherents, those scientists, to work on them. And that's a paradigm. Let's continue with our next quote. To be accepted as a paradigm, a theory must seem better than its competitors, but it need not, and in fact never does, explain all the facts with which it can be confronted. As we said before, a paradigm is often open-ended, and there are a lot of unsolved issues when a paradigm is introduced. Okay, but that doesn't mean the paradigm is invalid. In fact, that's what makes the paradigm valid. There's work to be done. Here I would like to discuss the difference between the word theory in the normal English language way of saying it, like in the court of law, and then the theory in the terms of the scientific community, the scientific enterprise. When we say theory in commonplace, like if you have a theory that somebody did something and you're convicting them of a crime, for instance, because you theorize that this person is committed a crime, the word you're using theory as the case that you don't know for sure, right? You have no evidence to back up your claim. It's just all speculation that may or may not make sense. That's a theory in a commonplace. But when we're talking about theory in the field of science, it's a little different than that. Actually, it's a lot different from that. When we say theory, we're talking about this concept of a paradigm. These ideas, these concepts that seem to work. They seem to be applicable. It seems that these are the case, that this is actually how nature or reality works as we know it thus far. It's not so much about being true as it is that it's a good explanation as to what's actually happening. And it's really up to other scientists, practitioners, to verify or invalidate the theory. There's a lot of theories out today where we aren't really sure if that's actually what's going on, but it's the best we have so far, like the theory of quantum mechanics, for instance, or when we talk about cosmology, dark energy, dark matter. We don't really know if those things actually exist, but that's what scientists theorize as to this the best explanation. And then they go out and work in the scientific community to verify or validate that. Okay, there's a difference. So let's continue with our next quote. One of the things the scientific community acquires with a paradigm is a criterion for choosing problems that, while the paradigm is taken for granted, can be assumed to have solutions. To a great extent, these are the only problems that the community will admit as scientific or encourage its members to undertake. Other problems, including many that had previously been standard, are rejected as metaphysical, as the concern of another principle, or sometimes as just too problematic to be worth the time. A paradigm can, for that matter, even insulate the community from those socially important problems that are not reducible to the puzzle form, because they cannot be stated in terms of the conceptual and instrumental tools the paradigm supplies. Such problems can be a distraction. What we're talking about is the setup for the paradigm shift. So scientists are working hard on a problem, and then what happens is that maybe another scientist comes in and they propose a theory. But the theory is so out there, so not aligned with the original paradigm, that a lot of the scientific community doesn't even accept it. They don't even hop on. And this is why Kuhn talks about revolutions, with the title of the book being the structure of scientific revolutions. Paradigm shifts are revolutions, and this is how science develops. There has to be some sort of scientific revolt of paradigms, of these theories, because when they're first proposed, a lot of scientists aren't going to hop on board because they're busy focusing on the paradigms that already exist. Next quote. Scientists can agree that a Newton, Lavoisier, did I say his name right? Oh well, Maxwell, or Einstein has produced an apparently permanent solution to a group of outstanding problems and still disagree, sometimes without being aware of it. about the particular abstract characteristics that make those solutions permanent. They can, that is, agree in their identification of a paradigm without agreeing on or even attempting to produce a full interpretation or rationalization of it. Lack of a standard interpretation or of an agreed reduction to rules will not prevent a paradigm from guiding research. Normal science can be determined in part by the direct inspection of paradigms, a process that is often aided by but does not depend upon the formulation of rules and assumptions. Indeed, the existence of a paradigm need not even imply that any full set of rules exists. Okay, so this is important to understand because a lot of times you'll see a lot of people trying to make sense out of theories in science, and a lot of these people are not scientists, and they criticize these theories because they say, oh well, these theories don't cover all the bases. A lot of these theories don't make sense when you're talking about this, that, or the other thing. But they don't have to necessarily cover all the bases, meaning they don't have to provide a complete and full explanation of everything they're trying to address. They're just the best explanation that the scientist is proposing thus far. And if there's a better explanation, then we will update that theory or change it up or completely get rid of it. An example of this is, the theory behind what a black hole is, right? A black hole in outer space is a point in which the force of gravity is infinite. And when you look at it mathematically, it's when you divide by zero, right? But what happens when you divide anything by zero in mathematics? It's undefined, right? But what does that mean? When you do mathematics and you go to a problem and you notice that the problem says the solution is you got divided by zero, and then I remember I would have to put undefined when I was doing that mathematical problems. But it's not really undefined. What it is we just don't know what that is scientifically yet. That's yet to be discovered, right? So we just leave it blank for now, or we just put a term on it without providing the explanation because we don't know. Yet, when we look at it scientifically, it still seems to be the case that what's going on with the black hole is that at that point, gravity is approaching infinity or reaching infinity at the singularity, the midpoint. But we really don't know what that means or what that really is. We can only theorize it. Likewise, when we talk about things like quantum mechanics, we start discussing how particles work, and then scientists start to observe or notice things as like a particle being able to exist in multiple places at the same time, yet we can't scientifically explain why that is, although that is something that we seem to be observing, the scientific community is observing. Just because we can't explain it completely doesn't make quantum mechanics invalid necessarily. Like, oh, this is just some invalid theory that we shouldn't use. No, that's not how it works. We propose a theory and then we allow the other scientists to hop on board and say, okay, let's see if I can approach this problem. Let's continue. When scientists disagree about whether the fundamental problems of their field have been solved, the search for rules gains a function that it does not ordinarily possess. While paradigms remain secure, however, they can function without agreement over rationalization or without any attempted rationalization at all. So oftentimes, problems or things that we can't fully explain in science get completely ignored, while the majority of the scientific community focuses on other problems that are more easily solvable. This happens in science all the time. Anomaly appears only against the background provided by the paradigm. The more precise and far-reaching that paradigm is, the more sensitive an indicator it provides of anomaly and hence of an occasion for paradigm change. So the stronger, the more far-reaching the paradigm is, the more offensive the anomaly, or the more strong the revolution becomes where it gets introduced. We can think of theories like the theory of evolution, where when Darwin first proposed that, many scientists did not accept it, right? Because it was just so against what was the current paradigm at the time, which was his understanding that living creatures or species usually don't go extinct, right? Or they don't die off and other species take over because they have traits that are more complementary to the environment. That usually doesn't happen. That's how the scientific community was at back then. So it took a while for the theory of evolution to catch on. It took a revolution, actually. And the offense was real in the scientific community. It is, I think, particularly in periods of acknowledged crisis, that scientists have turned to philosophical analysis as a device for unlocking the riddles of their field. Scientists have not generally needed or wanted to be philosophers. Indeed, normal science usually holds creative philosophy at arm's length, and probably for good reasons. But that is not to say that the search for assumptions, even for non-existent ones, cannot be an effective way to weaken the grip of a tradition upon the mind and to suggest the basis for a new one. It is no accident that the emergence of Newtonian physics in the 17th century and of relativity and quantum mechanics in the 20th should have been both preceded and accompanied by fundamental philosophical analysis of the contemporary research tradition. Nor is it an accident that in both these periods the so-called thought experiment should have played so critical a role in the progress of research. The analytical thought experimentation that bulks so large in the writings of Galileo, Einstein, Bohr, and others is perfectly calculated to expose the old paradigm to existing knowledge in ways that isolate the root of crisis with a clarity unattainable in the laboratory. So Kuhn is saying that, look, philosophy is needed sometimes in the field of science to help validate or support a lot of these paradigms. We definitely are seeing that in the field of cosmology, where the theories that are being proposed are so beyond experimentation. Philosophy is needed to kind of make sense of what is being talked about. That was a lot of what was going on when Einstein first proposed his theory of relativity, right? Where he talked about how, oh well, actually space is a fabric, where time and space are actually this one thing, space-time. And because of that, gravity affects time by making it relative, depending on where you're at in space. Although there was a lot of mathematics involved and a lot of science involved in the validation of that and the support of that paradigm, there was also a lot of thought experiments because it was just such a radical idea. There was a lot of philosophical analysis of okay, what does it mean to have these two things, time and space, which we thought were separate for so long, are actually interwoven, or we have to look at these things as one. What does that mean? We had to think about these things philosophically, and it helped us to understand the ideas, the concepts behind what Einstein was saying in this particular instance, the theory of relativity. Other examples, this has been the case as well. Philosophy has played a role in a lot of these paradigms that are just so beyond experimentation. Thought experiments are needed. Let us continue. Consider, for another example, the men who called Copernicus mad because he proclaimed that the earth moved. They were not either just wrong or quite wrong. Part of what they meant by earth was fixed position. Their earth, at least, could not be moved. Correspondingly, Copernicus's innovation was not simply to move the earth. Rather, it was a whole new way of regarding the problems of physics and astronomy, one that necessarily changed the meaning of both earth and motion. Without those changes, the concept of a moving earth was mad. On the other hand, once they had been made and understood, both Descartes and Huygens, probably butchered that, could realize that the Earth's motion was a question with no content for science. So oftentimes what happens is that when new theories are introduced, to be able to be accepted or to be able to become the new dominant paradigms, the scientific community has to first understand what the theory is proposing philosophically. As with the example of Copernicus, we have to change the way we think about the structure of the cosmos. Earth is not the center of the universe, although it might seem that way based off of observation because you're on a stationary body that and everything else is moving around you. But if you change the way you think about it, if you change the way you understand the cosmos philosophically, right, and propose to just make a radical shift and say, oh, maybe the Earth is not actually the center. Why does the Earth necessarily have to be the center? Right? Just because we're on it, that means that it's the center? No. Let me look at it philosophically and say maybe we're not actually that special. And the Earth is not actually the center of the cosmos. And if that's the case, then the whole structure of the cosmos, how the cosmos works, the motion of planets and other bodies are completely different to what was first thought. By thinking about these things philosophically, we open the door to allowing the further validation of these theories, these paradigms, through scientific experimentation and thus forth and so on. The man who embraces a new paradigm at an early stage must often do so in defiance of the evidence provided by problem solving. He must, that is, have faith that the new paradigm will succeed with the many large problems that confront it, knowing only that the older paradigm has failed with a few. A decision of that kind can only be made on faith. Okay? So the acceptance of a new paradigm at first requires faith, right? Because there's so many problems that are yet to be explained. You're going to introduce this new way of thinking, this new explanation of how reality works, right? But there's going to be a lot of problems that are going to be open-ended, and you have to kind of take a leap of faith, which is very interesting when you look at it that way, because a lot of people toot science's horn by saying that science is about we work off of facts and facts only, and faith are just notions of religious ideology and metaphysics and things like that. But the reality is the most innovative theories and ideas and innovations, for that matter, in science were first proposed by a leap of faith. Okay, there was also a lot of rationality and logic backing that leap of faith. Let's not get it twisted. But faith does play a part in how science develops. So remember, how science develops is scientists propose these theories, and a lot of these theories are just proposed concepts as to this is how I would think reality works. And a lot of scientists hop on board and say, oh, you know, that's a very good way of thinking about it. Maybe reality does work like that. We're going to work on this, what you're saying, and we're going to continue to use science to validate, and we're going to focus on these problems that your ideas don't address, and we're going to continue to work on this paradigm, and we're going to see if this is actually the case. It's not always necessarily true that when scientific ideas first become popular that they explain everything, or that there's no loose ends that are not tied and things like that. This is the scientific enterprise, okay? We're talking about the philosophy of science. I would highly recommend the Structure of Scientific Revolutions for your reading. If you're interested in the history of science, how science actually works, and the philosophy behind science. Check it out. Well, you've been watching The Black Ponder. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.